Hello and welcome to Greenelm station. I want to say a few words about how to get started on building a model railway layout. First thing you have to do is to think about, are you starting from scratch or have you already got some old model railway stuff that you want to keep using? Because the first real question you have to decide is, do you want to go analog or digital? If you have a lot of old engines that you want to keep running and they are all analog, then perhaps you probably want to continue to run analog. If you're starting from scratch, then my advice would be you better go digital. Basic difference is that on an analog you send a message to the rails. You send electric power to the rails and the trains that happen to be on the rails will move. If you put more power, they move faster. If you put less, they move slower. And all the engines on the same rails will move at the same speed and the same direction all the time. You can, of course, cut your layout into smaller parts and power them individually. So yes, you can actually run two locos, two trains on separate circles at different speeds if you have two transformers. But it's so much easier to do it if you have digital, DCC. And if you want to add a third loco crossing the other rails, you really need DCC. Also, let me show you something which you definitely cannot do on an analog rail. Two engines meeting, one stops, the other one gets closer. They decide to go one way, they decide to go the other way. Now, that would not be possible on an analog rail, I think. Some people will put in comments saying, yes, I know how to do that. Fine. But it's so much easier if you go digital. Basic difference in digital is not a plus and minus rail, it is rails that get a signal to the decoder in each engine, which means that you can run several engines on the same track and give them different information of what you want them to do. Now, choosing analog or digital is the first choice you have to make. Second choice is really a question of how much space have you got? Are you going to have a big layout on a fixed position in your attic or basement or somewhere else? Fine. If not, maybe if you're looking at a smaller layout, then you have to decide whether you want it transportable so that you can use it on an exhibition, or just something that you can put up and put down again when you've finished working on it. If you are, like I was, looking at a smaller layout, then you might consider using the so-called N scale, which is one of the smaller scales for the model railway. It has the advantage that you can fit more rails and more trains in a small space. It is a disadvantage that it is rather fiddly and there are limits to how much you can do and how many trains and engines and carriages and people, etc., that you can actually get that fit into the N scale. But N scale is becoming more and more popular, and you can actually join a Facebook group called N scale model railway. Right, once you have decided to go on that, then my advice is try to get some rails and some engines. If you buy a starter set like I did, it would come with a transformer, with a controller, and one engine and 3 or 4 carriages. And the one thing you very quickly discover is that there's no point in having DCC, the digital control system, if you only have one engine. The whole point is that you can control more than one engine. So run out and buy your second engine, third, fourth, etc. Don't leave it just with one engine. Try to put up different layouts on your dining table, on the floor, wherever, just to experiment with what kind of layout you want to use. Decide what size you have. Now, I decided that I wanted to have a layout that I could, at least theoretically, transport in my car. So I built a layout which is 2 by 1 meter, that's about 3 by 6 feet, I think, for those people who like Brexit and stuff. And it is foldable in the middle so that it folds down to 1 square meter, which I can just fit into the boot of my car. Now, having done that, I committed the big error of gluing down the tracks directly on the board that I had built. I later discovered that that was not such a good idea. I had to try to get them off again and put down an insulating layer of the kind of stuff that you use under a parquet floor to lower the noise. It also turned out that that is a very good thing to use for putting up your houses and roads and whatever else you want to build on the layout. So think about that before you start gluing your rails down. Maybe you better start by putting down some insulating foam or similar. Now, one other consideration that I didn't really make from the beginning, but that I'm making now, is what kind of time period or geographical area do you want to cover? If you watch, and I do recommend watch some of those excellent videos on YouTube where people explain how they're doing the stuff. And you will see that many of the good layouts are fixed on a particular location and a particular time. Most of them, of course, in England, but there are many, many different ways. If you, like I did, get an electric engine for starters, you will notice that it has this little grill on top, which is called a pantograph, which is a thing that they fold up to hit the overhead power wire, which is called, now I remember, it's called the catenary or catenary, whatever, however you want to pronounce it. Now, in most of the displays that I've seen, and certainly the ones in N-scale layout, you will see the electric engines running around without touching the catenary. Even in such a famous layout as the Hamburg miniature world, the electric engines do not touch the overhead wire. And that, of course, is not what they call prototypical. Of course, in real life, it could never run without touching the wire. So you have to decide, do you want to do that, or do you want to invest in a set of catenaries to put on your layout? I've inquired with some people on the Facebook group, does anybody actually use these catenaries on an N-scale layout? And as somebody said, no, that is suicide. You can do it, but you probably couldn't run the train with the pantograph raised. It would turn over the masts that hold the wires. So you have to decide, okay, accept the fact that you are running electrical locomotives, but they are not prototypical because they are running without touching the wire. Or choose to say, well, I will go for an earlier time period without electric locomotives. I will have diesel or steam engines, but no electrical locos. It's your decision. You have to decide that. Once you start putting down your layout, you have to keep running your trains through it, and time and again you will have problems with derailing trains or locos or carriages that derail at different, particularly at the points. The only thing you can do is to keep working on these points to make sure that everything is straight, everything is right. I found out on one particular point that the locos would not turn when they should, but it was just a question of moving one tiny little bit on the point, and then it worked perfectly. There is just a quick introduction to how to get started on DCC. There's a lot more to follow, but there you go, have fun.